Hi folks, and welcome back to Fishing with Den. And today we're going to be doing part 2 of the series on where I'm showing you how I'm making my lightweight fishing boat. More of a sort of a flats boat, I suppose, or a john boat, I suppose you'd call it. But this is the one which is going to be take apart, so it'll fit inside my car. So if you haven't watched part 1, I suggest you do that now. But for today, we're going to be looking at part 2. And that's where we're going to be looking at these things, which are the outriggers or pontoons, and I'll show you how I'm going to build them. But first, just a quick recap of where we got to on the boat so far. I've put the boat outside next to my car and clamped the main area, which I'm calling the tub, and the bow section together just temporarily, just to give you an idea of the size and shape of the thing. As I said before, it's got to fit inside my car. And so here's a quick picture of that with the bow section inside the main section and inside the car. Of course, we've still got all these outriggers and all sorts of other things to put in there. So eventually the main section will be somewhat more busy or full, shall we say. But in the meantime, this is just a quick indication of how it's going to look. Okay, so just a quick update on where I'd got to apart from that. Obviously, I've shown you what the thing looks like, but what I did, I spent probably most of yesterday sanding down all of the edges and making sure that everything was as watertight as it can be. And one thing I have found with boats is that there's an awful lot of sanding involved. I'm not going to show you what I did because watching sanding being done is probably just as bad as watching paint drying. So, without further ado, let's get on with showing you how I'm going to build these outriggers. I've made up one of the rear sections of the outriggers just to show you first of all. This is 800 millimeters long. I'll show you the dimensions in a second, but basically looking at construction, it's exactly the same kind of thing as we did for the main boat. It's made out of 4mm marine grade plywood, and the reason for that is lightness. I'm not going to need to make this as structurally sound as the main boat itself, which was 6mm plywood. So I was just looking at the lightness factor just to help me get this thing launched. So what I did do is I went and cut myself a series of 800mm boards, and size-wise they are 200mm, 190mm. The top is 230 millimeters, so 190, 230 means I get this angle. And do you remember in the last episode, I said that boats need to have a flared side? Well, that's how I'm flaring the sides of mine. Now, that does create a few issues for you, and you have to make sure that you do this correctly, because these things are going to be handed, in other words, left and right hand sides. So they mirror image each other. It's easy to get it wrong, and I have actually made some mistakes in the past when I've been doing this kind of thing. So what that means is, with this being 190 millimeters and the top being 230, this flares the sides out at about 13-degree angle. So now let's start the assembly. Remember what I said? These things are handed, so you have to make sure that one is the mirror image of the other. If you make them both the same, it's not going to work. So you'll have noticed that this bulkhead is further back than the middle, and I'll come back to the reason for that later. But what that means is that to mirror image it, I'll put a line on here for you so you can see. I'll now put the 500mm strips on this way around, so that when it comes to it, and I turn it around for actual use, these will be a mirror image. Hopefully that made sense, but if it didn't, all should become clear once I finish building. This is going to go on this way around. Just push down a little to try and keep it in place. And then what I do is I just turn it over. I'll use one of these as a support. Use the back plate of my bench here. Make sure it's level. And you can also use one of these just to make sure that's pushed right in to the wall. and then just use my brad nailer keep that pushed in. Okay. And that's the first one on. Just make sure when you do this, if you're going to do it my way, clear off the glue off the back there and obviously tidy up the piece itself. Do exactly the same thing for the other rail. Get your glue on, press down and then nail it together. If you don't have a brad nailer, don't worry, you can use pins and just a hammer, works just as well. This is just quicker. I've taken a scrap piece of 4mm plywood, just enough to fit across the ends of those two buttons, and I've just cut myself a couple of extra pieces of this beveled edge wood to go in there. I'm just going to nail these in place. If I take the piece of wood, that's actually quite a reasonably slack fit. Obviously when I put glue on there, it'll glue in solidly. So after a couple of mistakes with that mirror imaging, it's actually quite tricky, that trying to remember to do everything backwards. I've got this ready to go. So now all I've got to do is take these two side pieces and just put the 190mm base piece on. Again, just gluing and nailing. Now look, if you decide that this is all a bit too complicated, the easy way out of this is just to make them square. It's not then going to require any mirror imaging at all. Yes, all right, you won't have the flared sides, but do you necessarily need them? We'll wait and see. And that's both of the rear box sections of the pontoons all set up, ready to go. Of course, they haven't got the tops on yet, but we can't put those on until later. But you can see what I was saying about mirror imaging. We've got the two upright panels here and the two flared panels on the outsides here, obviously to go on either side of the boat. And next we'll make up the end panels, which are very similar to these, although these are the internal panels. The external panels will need to be just a little bit larger to make sure they cover the whole of the area there. But in essence, that's all it is, that shape. And here's almost the final product. I've got all the buttons in, I've glued and nailed the internal support in, and I've got the two external panels in. You may notice that this is all 19mm wood, but if you look more closely in here, this is actually more substantial. The reason for that is because I'm going to be putting one of these lift-off hinges underneath. So what that'll do is just give me the support I need to screw that hinge to it. The 19mm just wouldn't have been enough. Oh, I nearly forgot. There's also a reinforced button just along here, which is the flat side of the Outrigger. And again, that's as a support member. I can't really explain that just at the moment, but that'll be where the support goes to attach it to the side of the actual tub section, the main section of the boat. The only other thing I needed to be aware of was, of course, that the internal panel comes flush with the lid, but these external panels have to be slightly raised by about 4mm because the lid's got to go on top, and then everything will just sit quite neatly once we've sanded the thing down. So that's the back pontoon done. The front section is actually almost identical, but what I'm gonna have to do is to mess about a bit with the way things work at the front, because we've got an angle on that at the very front, and I need to give it a little bit of thought to decide exactly how I'm going to do it. Okay, well, I decided to build this first one before I showed you exactly how I did it, purely and simply because I didn't know how I was going to do it. Having done it, I did make a couple of mistakes, which I'll show you in a second. But as you can see, it's turned out pretty well. Quite a neat little job. Done a little bit of sanding off the front just to make sure it looks nice for you, just for the moment. I put the top on, but it's not fixed down at the moment. I'm not going to actually fix the tops down because I've actually got to put the cleats on here to hold onto the side of the boat. We'll be getting to that shortly. But first of all then, if we're talking about the actual pontoon itself, the frontal area structure is exactly the same as everything else, just these 19mm wooden battens to put everything together. Obviously bear in mind that we've got an angle on the side of the thing here, so it's flared out. So that actually did cause a few complications, and I did make a mess at one point of it, and I thought I was going to have to start again. If you can see in here, hopefully you can see that, but that brown stuff there is Type 1-3 glue mixed in with some sawdust, which I'd taken off the garage floor, mixed together to make a paste and added in, and it's actually surprisingly strong. Because I also made a mess of the angle here, I've also inserted it in there. Now, I don't know whether that's going to be strong enough or not, but I suspect it is, so I'm going to go with it. Like I said all along, I've never built a boat before, and this isn't going to be structural, but basically we've got to a point now where this has actually come together quite neatly. So now, let me show you how I built it. Before I put this together, I took the opportunity to cut 45-degree angles down for this section here. I think it was 80mm down from the top to here, and then 45 degrees straight down. I also took the opportunity to cut this forward section at 45 degrees. As you can see, I then assembled the thing, and we've got to the point now where we've got the normal battens on, like you've seen me doing for the other pontoons. Now, to make the front, I've cut this piece of 4mm ply. It's the same width at the top as the main pontoon itself, but I've also cut a 45-degree angle on here, so that when it slides onto the front, it sits in nicely like that. That means that everything at the bottom is flat. Of course, everything at the sides is not flat, it's going to stick out. You probably can't see that too well, but what we're going to do is fit it, and then I'll cut it down from there just to make it fit properly. As far as the front panel goes, again, there's a 45-degree angle on here. That sits in like that. And again, it's at 230mm. And really, all I've got to do now is to create the battens for that, get it all glued in, and this one's finished too. I've cut this support batten, so it's got a 45-degree angle at the front. It's a 19mm pine, and it's probably 50mm that way. So I'll just put this onto here, glue it down, and obviously nail it in place. The rest of these battens are actually fairly straightforward, but this one, which goes in here, like that, I have to remember I've cut a 13-degree angle across the top there to accommodate. On the other side, it's exactly square, because remember, this is the flared out, angled side. So I'll just get those on, we'll then get the two lower pieces on, and we'll look at doing the front. So with these frontal battens on, I've just spent a few minutes just sanding down these edges to try and make it as flat as possible to accept this front plate. I'm not going to worry too much about the fact that there may be odd slight gaps in here. In fact, if I show you, there are some gaps here because with the compound angles I didn't quite get it right. I'm not going to worry about that. I will put a bit more glue in sort of down here in a short while, but by the time we've got this plate on and we've sealed the outside and the inside with poor man's fiberglass, and there will be another video on that part, I'm basically going to have a waterproof structure. So let's take this front plate, and remember we have this 45-degree angle on this side here. And I'm just going to glue it, nail it in position, and that'll be everything sorted out there. Then of course we just take this one and put it on the top. But you have to be a bit careful when you do this because this tends to move in and out. So make sure you've got this plate on the top and just held down while you're doing this one down here. I'm just going to mix up some of this thickened glue using the sawdust from the floor. Just going to mix it through until I get to the consistency of, I don't know, a sauce of some variety. I've heard people say peanut butter before, but as I don't really eat peanut butter, it's not something I can comment on. But really, that's as much as I need to do. Make sure it's properly glued in like that. Not glued in, mixed up. Okay, I'm going to try and lock this against here so you can see what I'm doing. It makes it awkward sometimes when you're trying to do these things. And I'm just going to fill in any of these holes on here like that. I'll spread that out and we can then get that front plate on. And then, as I was saying before, use this top plate. Excuse me, got to get some glue off, otherwise I'm going to glue my shirt. You'll realise I made the mistake of putting glue up here as well, but we'll get around to that in a second. So, using this top plate, I'm going to make sure that that's exactly the same distance from there to there, and just get another nail in. Just check it, let go, and that's kept it in position. Okay, that's the main one in. Right. Remember we've got the 45-degree angle on this, get it in the right way around. And again, just make sure you push down and we can then get the nails in. Bit of clean up. Then we just wait for this to dry a bit and we can do some more sanding. Morning. Right, well I left everything overnight to dry off properly, and this morning I've just used this pull saw to just shave off the excess bits around these sides and in front here. Now what I'm going to do is sand it all off smooth, and in a few minutes time we should end up with a nice smooth one like this. So that's it for part 2. Part 3 is where we seal up the seams of the boat, because we wouldn't want to leak and drown, would we? I'm going to be using a thing called poor man's fiberglass. It's a bit like using epoxy and fiberglass matting to actually seal all these things up, but as we say, it's the poor man's way of doing it. Anyway, that's for next time. As for this time, we're all done. Hope you enjoyed it. If you did, as always, click the button. If you want to subscribe, you can. And until the next time, bye for now.